The moment the lights went out was not dramatic at first. No alarms. No shouting. Just a soft click, followed by darkness folding in on itself. The kind of darkness that feels heavier than it should, pressing against your eyes, your chest, your thoughts. For most people, that moment would trigger panic. A rush of questions. What's happening? Where am I? Who's watching? But panic didn't come. Not for her. She registered the blackout the same way she registered everything else, quickly, without emotion. The hum of the building stopped. Footsteps shifted outside the door. Someone cleared their throat. She noted the timing, the spacing, the way the air changed when the lights died, cooler, quieter, stripped of distractions. Darkness was not an enemy. Darkness was information. They thought the lights were for her. They believed brightness kept control on their side. Clipboards, cameras, visibility. When the lights failed, they assumed fear would rush in to fill the space. That fear would soften her, make her smaller, easier. They didn't notice that the room didn't belong to them anymore. In the dark, details matter more. Sound sharpens. Distance becomes measurable. She counted breaths that weren't hers. One near the door, one farther back. Shoes scuffing tile. A faint electronic buzz trying to restart overhead. Someone whispered that maintenance would fix it. Someone else laughed, uneasy, filling the silence because silence makes people nervous. Silence tells the truth. She adjusted her posture slightly. Not enough to draw attention. Enough to feel the floor beneath her feet. Weight balanced. Shoulders relaxed. Muscles loose, ready. Training surfaced automatically, not as memory, but as instinct. Low-light drills. Blacked-out rooms. Long nights where vision was useless and awareness kept you alive. She had learned that darkness doesn't erase things. It reveals them. Her breathing slowed. Not because she forced it, but because her body recognized the situation as familiar. Control returned inward. She wasn't waiting to see what would happen. She was mapping possibilities. The door, the walls, the voices, the pauses between movements. Darkness gave her space to think while everyone else lost theirs. They shifted again. Someone muttered about procedure. Another voice said to wait it out. Authority sounds different when it's unsure. It thins. It stretches. It repeats itself. In the dark, confidence can't hide behind posture or uniforms. You hear it crack when people realize their advantage was borrowed from the light. Then there was the flicker, just for a second. An emergency indicator struggling to wake up. A thin line of light cut across the room, barely enough to matter. Barely enough to notice. Except she noticed. Always. That faint reflection touched her face, skimmed across her eye, and vanished. But it was enough. Because that eye didn't widen. Didn't dart. Didn't look away. Someone saw it. A sharp inhale. Silence where a voice should have been. A pause that lasted too long. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it stops everything cold. The kind of fear that comes from realizing a mistake, not from being threatened, but from understanding too late that the rules you were playing by no longer apply. The lights were supposed to disarm her. Instead, they exposed them. Every shift of weight, every nervous movement, every assumption they had walked in with. In that darkness, she didn't need to act. She didn't need to speak. Presence was enough. Stillness was enough. The room held its breath. They were waiting for the lights to come back on. Waiting for normal to return. Waiting for the moment where they could pretend nothing had changed. But something had changed already. The balance. The awareness. The understanding of who was actually prepared for this moment and who was not. Because when the lights go out, titles don't matter. Rank doesn't glow. Authority doesn't hum. All that's left is who you are when you can't see, when you can't hide, when you can't rely on the world behaving the way you expect it to. And in that darkness, she was exactly where she had trained to be, calm, ready, watching while others stood exposed, realizing that the moment the lights went out was the moment they lost control. They underestimated her long before she ever entered the room. It started with assumptions that felt harmless on the surface. The way their eyes passed over her without stopping. The casual tone in their voices. The unspoken belief that she was out of place, outmatched, easy to manage. They didn't say it directly, but it lived in every small decision they made. Where they positioned her. How they spoke around her instead of to her. how they planned the situation as if she would follow a predictable script. Underestimation is comfortable. It lets people relax. It tells them they don't need to prepare too deeply or look too closely. They believe control came from structure and authority, from rules written down and enforced by routine. They had rooms designed to intimidate, procedures meant to overwhelm. They had done this before, and most people responded the same way. Confusion, compliance, fear. They assumed she would too. What they didn't see was what she carried quietly. Not in her hands, not in her pockets, in the way she stood without stiffness, in how she listened without reacting, in how her eyes observed without searching for reassurance. She didn't ask questions to fill silence. She didn't rush to explain herself. Those habits read as weakness to people who rely on dominance. Silence, to them, looks like submission. Stillness looks like surrender. They misread discipline as passivity. They mistook restraint for uncertainty. They believed strength always announces itself, that it demands attention, that it pushes back loudly. They were used to dealing with people who needed to prove something. She didn't. That alone made her invisible to them. Bias did the rest. She didn't match their mental picture of threat. Not the right posture. Not the right tone. Not the right presence. Their idea of danger was loud, obvious, aggressive. It wore the shape they expected. Anything outside that shape was discounted. So they focused on their checklists, their routines, their sense of superiority. They spoke freely around her, shared details they shouldn't have, let their guard down in small ways that added up. Overconfidence leaks information. It shows up in careless words, in relaxed stances, in the belief that nothing unexpected can happen. They believed the environment was working for them. The lighting, the layout, the process. They trusted the system more than their own awareness. She noticed everything. Underestimation gave her time. Time to listen. Time to watch patterns repeat. Time to understand who led and who followed. Who hesitated. Who filled space with noise. Who stayed quiet when things went off script. They never considered that she was learning them while they dismissed her. They tried to pressure her with tone instead of force. Questions that weren't really questions. Statements framed as choices. They expected signs of stress, raised voice, defensive posture, something they could point to and say, there it is. But she stayed even, measured. Her calm didn't crack, and that unsettled them in ways they couldn't explain. When people underestimate you, they stop adapting. They stop thinking ahead. They rely on what worked before. That's when situations become dangerous for the ones who feel safest. They didn't prepare for resistance because they didn't believe resistance was possible. They didn't plan for intelligence because they didn't believe she had any advantage. They assumed compliance was inevitable. The gap between who they thought she was and who she actually was kept widening. Every minute that passed without the reaction they expected made them push harder in the wrong direction. More authority, more pressure, less awareness. They mistook her lack of visible fear for confusion. They mistook her patience for delay. Underestimation also blinded them to themselves, to their own tells, their own habits, their own reliance on control mechanisms that only worked under perfect conditions. They didn't ask what would happen if those conditions changed. They didn't imagine the lights going out. They didn't imagine silence turning against them. They didn't imagine that the person they thought they were managing was trained to operate precisely when structure collapses. By the time they felt something was off, it was already too late to correct. Underestimation doesn't announce itself as a mistake. It feels like confidence right up until the moment it becomes vulnerability. And in that space, where belief collides with reality, the power they thought they had begins to drain away, leaving behind uncertainty, hesitation, and the quiet realization that they never really understood who they were dealing with. They believed the dark room was meant to strip power away. No windows, no distractions, no sense of time. A controlled environment designed to unsettle, to make people feel small and exposed. Darkness, to them, was a tool of dominance. Take away what someone can see, and you take away what they can control. That belief shaped the room, the process, and their confidence walking into it. What they didn't understand was that the dark room didn't weaken her. It leveled the field, and then quietly tilted it in her favor. In the dark, there is no performance. No visual cues to fake certainty. No body language amplified by light. Everything that remains is real. Sound, space, movement, timing. She had been trained to operate when vision was compromised, when chaos erased comfort, when decision-making had to happen without hesitation. Darkness wasn't a void. It was a working environment. The moment the lights disappeared, her awareness expanded. She no longer had to manage how she looked or how her reactions might be interpreted. She could disappear into the space without moving at all. The dark erased her from their visual dominance, but it sharpened her connection to everything else. Every footstep became data. Every shift of weight signaled intention. Every breath revealed nerves. They stayed still, thinking stillness meant control. She stayed still because stillness let her listen. The room itself began to speak. Air circulation hummed unevenly. One wall reflected sound differently than the others, telling her its distance. The door creaked slightly under pressure, confirming where people stood. Someone's shoe tapped once, then stopped. A habit. A leak of tension. Darkness magnifies habits. People don't realize how loud they become when they can't see. She adjusted internally, aligning herself with the space. The dark room removed clutter. No screens. No faces demanding reaction. No artificial urgency. Just raw input and time to process it. Her thoughts slowed, not from hesitation, but from clarity. This was where training replaced emotion, where response became choice instead of impulse. They expected the room to compress her. Instead, it gave her room to expand. In low visibility, fear spreads faster than confidence. People look to one another for cues that don't come. Authority loses its edge when it can't be seen. Commands sound weaker when they aren't reinforced by posture or presence. The dark strips rank down to voice alone, and voices carry uncertainty whether people want them to or not. She heard it immediately. The subtle change in tone. The extra words added to instructions. The way sentences trailed off instead of landing cleanly. They were waiting for the lights to return so they could feel in control again. Waiting for the environment to rescue them from having to adapt. She didn't need the environment to change. This was her environment now. The dark room turned assumptions into liabilities. The cameras they trusted were useless. The layout they memorized lost its advantage. The procedures designed for visibility stalled. Their reliance on systems became a weakness. Hers was self-contained, portable, always on. Darkness also gave her anonymity. They couldn't read her face, couldn't track her gaze, couldn't tell if she was watching them or thinking 3 steps ahead. That uncertainty pressed in on them, filling the room heavier than the absence of light ever could. Humans fear what they can't measure. In the dark, she became unmeasurable. They shifted positions again, unaware of how loudly they announced it. Each movement painted a clearer picture for her. She didn't need to see them to know where they were. She didn't need to touch anything to know what options existed. Darkness sharpened her sense of control while dulling theirs. The dark room also stripped away urgency. Without clocks or cues, time stretched. Silence lengthened. People hate unfilled time. They rush to end it, to speak, to act, to force progress. She used it, letting seconds pass without reaction, letting discomfort grow, letting them feel the weight of waiting. In that space, pressure reversed direction. They designed the room to break resistance. Instead, it exposed it. Their discomfort grew louder while hers stayed quiet. Their need to resolve the situation increased while she remained steady. The dark didn't isolate her. It insulated her. By the time they realized the room was no longer working the way they intended, it had already reshaped the dynamic. The dark room had stopped being a tool of intimidation and had become a tactical advantage, not because of anything built into its walls, but because of who understood how to use it, who had trained for moments where structure collapses, where vision fails, where confidence has to come from within, where control isn't imposed from the outside, but claimed silently, patiently. In the dark, the look itself lasted less than a second. It wasn't deliberate. It wasn't meant to send a message. It happened because light behaves the way it does, because even the smallest flicker can betray more than silence ever will. A weak emergency glow tried to come alive, barely strong enough to justify its own existence, and for a brief moment it touched her face. Most people would have reacted without thinking. A blink, a flinch, a reflexive tightening around the eyes. Something that says I'm exposed. Something that asks for mercy or prepares for impact. Her eye didn't do that. It stayed steady, focused, awake in a way that didn't belong to the situation they thought they were controlling. Someone noticed, not because they were observant, but because the absence of fear is louder than fear itself. The human brain is wired to look for patterns, and when a pattern breaks, attention snaps to it. In that instant, the look didn't match the room, didn't match the power dynamic, didn't match the expectations they had built so carefully. It created a crack. The eye reflected light instead of avoiding it. Not wide, not defiant, just calm, measured, as if darkness was an old acquaintance rather than a threat. That single detail collided with everything they thought they knew about her. You can explain away words. You can dismiss posture. But the eyes don't lie when the body has nothing to gain by performing. The reaction was immediate, even if it wasn't spoken. A sharp intake of breath. A pause where movement should have continued. The sound of someone recalculating too late. Fear didn't rush in. Recognition did. The kind that hits before logic has time to intervene. The kind that whispers something is wrong. That look carried information. Not in a dramatic way. Not like a warning. More like confirmation. Confirmation that she was present in the dark, not lost in it. Confirmation that she was processing everything, not overwhelmed by it. Confirmation that she was trained. People who have spent time around real danger learn to recognize that look in others. It doesn't belong to movies or stories. It belongs to people who have learned to stay when every instinct says to flee. It belongs to people who don't need to prove anything because they already know what they can do. The room changed after that. Voices sounded different. Less confident. More careful. Movements slowed, not out of strategy, but uncertainty. Once doubt enters a space like that, it spreads quietly. No one wants to be the one who misjudged the situation. No one wants to be the one who missed the obvious sign. The look stripped away their narrative. Up until then, they had a story they were telling themselves. That she was contained. That she was manageable. That the environment favored them. That story depended on her fitting into a specific role. The look refused that role without saying a word. They couldn't unsee it. Even when the light faded again, the impression stayed. Darkness doesn't erase what's already registered. The mind fills in what the eyes can't see. Now, every silence felt intentional. Every still moment felt loaded. They started projecting meaning onto things that had been neutral before. Her breathing, her lack of movement, her patience. The look also flipped the observer and the observed. For a split second, it was clear who was aware of whom. Who was watching. Who was being assessed. That realization unsettles people more than overt threat. It suggests vulnerability without offering a clear response. They didn't know what she knew, but they knew she knew something. That I had not asked for help. It had not asked for time. It had not searched for reassurance. It had simply existed, alert and unbothered. In environments built on intimidation, that is disruptive. Intimidation relies on reaction. Without it, the mechanism stalls. The look didn't challenge them directly. That would have been easier to deal with. It didn't provoke. It didn't escalate. It just contradicted their expectations so completely that it forced a pause. And in that pause, power wavered. Training lives in moments like that. Not in action, but in restraint. Not in aggression, but in awareness. Anyone can look tough when the lights are on. Very few can look calm when they're not supposed to. They began to second-guess themselves, replaying the moment in their heads, wondering if they imagined it, wondering if others noticed, wondering what it meant. Doubt fractured their unity. Some grew cautious. Others grew defensive. Authority splintered into competing instincts. She didn't need to repeat the look. It had already done its work. Because once someone sees that kind of calm in the dark, they can't forget it. It reframes everything that comes after. Every decision becomes heavier. Every assumption feels riskier. The environment stops feeling predictable. Control feels thinner. The room feels smaller. And all of it started with a single beam of light catching an eye that didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't need to speak to say that whatever game they thought they were playing was no longer unfolding the way they expected. They believed authority would carry them through. Badges, procedures, roles clearly defined. The structure itself was supposed to do the work for them. Authority, when it's never questioned, starts to feel permanent. It convinces people that compliance is automatic, that resistance is rare, and that outcomes are predictable. They had relied on that belief for a long time. Training doesn't work that way. Training doesn't care about titles. It doesn't respond to volume or posture. It's built for moments when systems fail and assumptions collapse. While authority depends on others recognizing it, training exists whether anyone acknowledges it or not. That difference mattered more than anyone in the room realized. They spoke with confidence, shaped by hierarchy. Commands delivered out of habit. Expectations rooted in how people usually respond. Their authority had always been reinforced by environment and routine. Bright rooms, clear lines of sight, familiar processes. When those things were stripped away, authority lost its scaffolding. Her training did not. She didn't wait for instructions to feel secure. She didn't need confirmation to stay grounded. Everything she relied on was internal. Awareness, control over her breathing, control over her reactions, the ability to remain present without needing feedback. Training had taught her how to function when no one was guiding the moment. Authority expects obedience. Training expects chaos. They continued to operate as if the situation would correct itself, as if the lights would come back on and restore order, as if silence was temporary and not a warning. Authority tends to pause when it loses traction, waiting for familiar conditions to return. Training adapts forward. She didn't challenge them openly. She didn't resist in visible ways. That would have fit their expectations. Authority knows how to respond to defiance. It struggles with composure. It struggles with someone who doesn't give it anything to push against. They mistook her restraint for compliance. They mistook her calm for confusion. Those misreadings widened the gap. Every second they waited for a reaction that never came, their authority thinned. It became something they had to assert instead of something that simply existed. Training slows up quietly. It slowed in how she measured the room without looking, in how she didn't fill silence with explanations, in how she conserved energy instead of leaking it through nervous movement. Training had taught her that moments like this are not about proving strength, but about preserving options. Authority wanted resolution. Training wanted time. They were driven by procedure, checklists, steps to be followed in order. When the environment broke those steps, uncertainty crept in. Authority struggles when it can't progress forward. Training thrives there. It finds alternate paths. It adapts goals. It waits without losing focus. Her training had prepared her for uncertainty, for operating without clarity, for making decisions when information is incomplete. Authority had prepared them for compliance, for cooperation, for situations where people play their assigned roles. The difference became obvious in the way tension moved through the room. Authority made them restless. Training kept her steady. Authority demanded control outward. Training reinforced control inward. They grew louder. She grew quieter. Authority relies on visibility. Training functions in obscurity. They couldn't see her face, couldn't read her posture, couldn't gauge her reactions. That made them uneasy. Authority needs feedback to adjust. Training doesn't. She didn't need to know how they felt to remain composed. She didn't need reassurance that she was handling the situation correctly. They tried to regain ground with tone, firmer words, subtle threats wrapped in formal language. Authority escalates when it feels ignored. Training recognizes escalation as information, not pressure. She cataloged it without reacting. Training had taught her patience. Not passive waiting, but active restraint. The kind that keeps you from revealing intent too early. The kind that lets others exhaust their options first. Authority doesn't like patience. It reads it as stalling. They believe power came from the ability to command. Her training taught her power comes from the ability to endure. As the minutes stretched, their authority began to feel performative, something they were acting out rather than embodying. Each instruction sounded less certain than the last. Each pause between words grew longer. Authority started asking for acknowledgement instead of assuming it. Her training required no acknowledgement. She didn't need to remind herself who she was or what she was capable of. That had been settled long before this moment. Training had burned those truths into muscle memory and instinct. Authority had to be reaffirmed constantly, or it faded. In the dark, stripped of reinforcement, authority weakened. Training sharpened. They were waiting for compliance. She was operating on preparation. They were focused on outcome. She was focused on process. They needed the room to function a certain way. She needed nothing to change. The imbalance widened with every breath. Authority became effort. Training remained natural. Authority demanded control. Training already had it. Control doesn't disappear all at once. It shifts in small, almost unnoticeable ways. A pause that lasts a little too long. A decision delayed. A voice that waits for confirmation instead of giving direction. At first, it feels temporary, like a glitch that will correct itself. That's how it began here. Quietly, they still believed they were in charge. Belief is powerful, especially when it has always been rewarded. They had rooms, rules, and routines designed to keep things moving in one direction. Control, to them, was built into the process. As long as the process held, so would their authority. They didn't realize the process had already fractured. The first sign was hesitation. No one wanted to make the wrong call in the dark. No one wanted to step forward without seeing the full picture. Control thrives on momentum, and momentum stalled. Instructions were repeated instead of advanced. Words circled back on themselves. When people stop moving forward, they start looking at each other. She noticed the shift immediately, not because she was searching for weakness, but because she was attuned to change. Control leaves fingerprints when it slips. The absence of decisiveness. The increase in verbal filler. The way bodies orient toward one another instead of toward her. Authority had turned inward. As their focus narrowed, hers widened. She wasn't pulling control away from them. She was allowing it to drain on its own. There's a difference. Forced dominance creates resistance. Letting others unravel creates openings. She stayed still, letting the imbalance grow without interfering. Someone finally spoke up, trying to reassert direction. The words came out firm, but the timing was off. Too late. Others hesitated before responding. A fraction of a second, but enough. Control depends on immediate response. Delays introduced doubt. They started to manage each other instead of the situation. Subtle corrections. Quiet disagreements. Questions phrased as suggestions. Control fractured into pieces, each person holding a fragment, none of them holding enough to feel secure. The unity that had once made them confident began to dissolve. She became the constant in the room, not by doing anything, but by not changing. While their behavior fluctuated, hers did not. Humans gravitate toward stability, even unconsciously. The more uncertain they became, the more her calm presence disrupted their expectations. Control also shifted emotionally. Frustration crept in. You could hear it in clipped responses and strained politeness. Emotional leakage is a sign of slipping authority. When people feel in control, they regulate themselves easily. When they don't, irritation surfaces. They tried to compensate with urgency, talking faster, pushing for resolution. But urgency without clarity only deepened the imbalance. It made mistakes more likely. It exposed fear. Control built on urgency is brittle. She didn't match their pace. She didn't rush to fill the space. She let their urgency bounce off her calm. That contrast amplified the shift. Control, once external and imposed, began to feel internal and contained within her. They could feel it, even if they couldn't name it. The sense that the situation was no longer unfolding on their terms. That they were reacting instead of directing. That something essential had tipped without any visible action. Control also moved in perception. They began to see her differently, no longer as someone to be managed, but as an unknown variable. Unknowns disrupt control because they force reassessment. Reassessment takes time. Time they no longer felt they had. Someone suggested bringing the lights back manually. Another said to wait. Competing instincts surfaced. Control requires alignment. Without it, authority fragments. They couldn't agree on the next step, and that indecision hung in the air. She didn't exploit the moment. She didn't need to. Control was already shifting toward her simply because she was prepared to exist in uncertainty, prepared to wait, prepared to observe without anxiety. They felt exposed, not physically, but psychologically. The tools they relied on weren't working. The environment wasn't reinforcing their roles. The person they thought they understood no longer fit their expectations. That exposure created self-consciousness, and self-consciousness weakens command. Control finally crossed an invisible line. It stopped feeling shared. It stopped feeling secure. It became something they were chasing instead of something they possessed. Once that happens, the dynamic is irreversibly altered. She didn't take control by force. She didn't announce it. She didn't even acknowledge it. Control settled where it naturally belongs in moments like this, with the person who could remain composed without structure, who could wait without discomfort, who could operate without needing reassurance, who understood that true control doesn't come from directing others, but from mastering yourself while everyone else is still trying to hold the room together.